The knock came at 9:02 a.m. sharp. It wasn't the gentle rap of a visitor, nor the polite summons of an aide. This was a seismic tremor, a blunt impact not on a door, but on the very bedrock of a nation's sovereignty. Deep beneath the sun-baked earth of Burkina Faso, within the heavily secured, reinforced vault of the Ministry of Natural Resources, a quiet revolution was simmering. Technicians, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors, were meticulously preparing for a moment decades in the making, the grand launch of the country's first state-owned gold refinery. This was more than just an industrial facility. It was the final, gleaming component of President Ibrahim Traoré's audacious 5-year plan, a blueprint designed not just to process ore, but to sever the invisible chains of foreign dependence, to keep Burkina's gold, its very soul, its lifeblood, firmly within its own borders. Before you dive into a story that will redefine sovereignty, challenge the mighty, and ignite a spark of defiance across continents, take a moment. If this narrative resonates with the unyielding spirit of independence, if it speaks to the silent battles fought for dignity, then subscribe to our journey, like this unfolding saga, and comment with your thoughts as the world watches. For what you are about to witness is not just a tale, but a turning point. But outside, in the cool, echoing expanse of the marble hallways, an unexpected convoy had arrived. Its sleek, black vehicles, far too numerous for a courtesy visit, hummed with an unspoken authority. At their epicenter stood a figure who exuded power as effortlessly as he breathed. Scott Bessent, the newly appointed U.S. Treasury Secretary, was a man carved from the sharpest stone of global finance. His tailored navy suit hung flawlessly, a crimson tie providing the only splash of color against his steely composure. He was sharp, polished, and unapologetically direct, a human embodiment of the system he represented. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "I need a word," he stated, his voice cutting through the hushed reverence of the ministry, addressing the bewildered Minister of Mines. "This refinery, it's a problem." The minister, a man accustomed to the intricate dance of diplomacy, blinked. "A problem for who, Mr. Secretary?" he managed, his voice barely a whisper against the sudden chill in the air. Bessent's smile was a cold, clipped thing, devoid of warmth. "For everyone who believes in a stable market, gold shouldn't be hoarded, it should be circulated, under supervision." His gaze was unwavering, a silent threat embedded in every syllable. Meanwhile, miles away, in the austere elegance of the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré was concluding a call. His new gold-backed trade alliance, a bold countermove against the dollar's hegemony, was gaining undeniable momentum. "Less dollar, more dignity," he had just affirmed to an East African leader, the words hanging in the air like a promise. It was at this precise moment that an aide burst into the room, breathless. "Sir, Scott Bessent is in the capital. He's at the vault." Traoré leaned back in his chair, a man utterly unfazed by the seismic news. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Let him walk through our walls," he said, his voice a low, resonant calm. "I'll teach him that this is not the house of cards he's used to." Back at the vault, Bessent was speaking with the full weight of his office, surrounded by a phalanx of analysts and diplomats, their faces a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. "You're sitting on $3 billion in reserves," he declared, his voice resonating with an almost imperial authority. "Let me be blunt. Those reserves are part of a global balance, and that balance is built on the dollar. You disrupt that, you invite consequences." The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating stillness. But it was not for long. A new presence entered, a quiet force that broke through the tension like a spear. Traoré's voice, calm and measured, preceded him. He wore his signature brown officer uniform, a stark contrast to Bessent's crisp suit, and he walked in quietly, his gaze, sharp and unwavering, locked directly on Bessent. "I heard you were interested in our gold," he said, his tone deceptively mild. Bessent turned, his composure momentarily faltering. "President Traoré, I am here on behalf of the International Financial Order." Traoré nodded slowly, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Ah, the order where you print and we dig." Bessent stiffened, his jaw tightening. "The United States has invested billions in maintaining global stability. If you want to operate outside that system, be ready for the storm that comes with it." Traoré stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them, shrinking the perceived power gap. "You said our gold still belonged to you," he stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Then he pointed, with an almost casual gesture, to the sealed, gleaming vault behind him. "I'm here to tell you," his eyes, unflinching, met Bessent's. "Come and take it." The silence that followed was not merely quiet, it was volcanic. A Treasury Secretary stunned into immobility. A room frozen in the wake of an audacious declaration. The rules, in that single defiant moment, had just changed, and the world, unbeknownst to many, was watching. The phrase, "come and take it," echoed in Scott Bessent's ears like a gunshot, a stark, defiant challenge that shattered the carefully constructed illusion of American financial invincibility. He didn't flinch, at least not outwardly. His posture remained rigid, his tailored suit a fortress of composure. But beneath the polished veneer, a cold fury began to churn. It wasn't just defiance, it was a declaration of war against the very system he was sworn to uphold, the petrodollar world order, the invisible strings of the IMF, the quiet, pervasive grip of global finance. He straightened his jacket, a subtle gesture of a man preparing for battle. "Let me be clear, Mr. President." Bessent's voice, though still controlled, carried a sharper edge. "This tone, this posture will isolate you. You'll face sanctions, suspended aid, frozen assets. The consequences will be swift and severe." Ibrahim Traoré, however, remained unmoved. He walked slowly to the window of the underground vault room, his gaze fixed not on Bessent, but on the rising sun, a sliver of defiant gold peeking through the concrete slats above. He spoke without turning, his voice a low, almost meditative rumble. "Sanctions," he said, a hint of weary scorn in his tone. "You already sanctioned our dignity a long time ago." A hush fell over the room, heavier than before. "We are done trading gold for debt," Traoré continued, finally turning to face Bessent, his eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "Done sending wealth to the West and begging for loans in return. Burkina Faso is not a branch office of your treasury." Bessent crossed his arms, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Then enjoy the consequences. Your trade partners won't touch you if the U.S. blacklists your gold." Traoré's voice lowered, but hardened like tempered steel. "They will, because they're tired of asking for permission to breathe." That evening, the news broke like a dam across financial outlets worldwide. Breaking: Burkina Faso refuses U.S. Treasury demands, continues gold nationalization program. In the Situation Room at the White House, National Security Advisor Paul Rowley slammed a folder on the table. "We told them this would happen if we let Traoré grow unchecked. Now he's openly daring the Treasury on global TV." President Biden leaned forward, his expression grave. "Options. We freeze their accounts, cut IMF ties, pressure neighboring countries. And what about military leverage?" Rowley shook his head.
Too risky. Russia and China are circling. The pressure mounted, a suffocating weight descending upon Ouagadougou. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré's advisors gathered for an emergency night session. This could break us economically, Finance Minister Issata Sawato admitted, his face etched with exhaustion. Our reserves are limited. If swift access is blocked, we lose the ability to pay for imports. Traoré listened silently, his fingers steepled, his gaze distant. Then he spoke, his voice calm amidst the rising panic. Let them freeze us. It will show our people that what they call international community is just a club for empire. Then what's our next move? Someone asked, desperation creeping into their voice. Traoré stood, his presence filling the room. We break the illusion. Tomorrow I'll address the nation and the world, not as a beggar, as a man who owns what's under his feet. The next morning, cameras were set, flags unfurled. The speech was already being broadcast before Traoré even reached the podium. Bessent watched from the U.S. Embassy, his phone buzzing with calls from D.C. And then Traoré appeared on the screen, calm, firm, unapologetic. We have been told our gold belongs to others, that freedom is a product with a price tag. Today, we say no more. Our land, our wealth, our rules. Burkina Faso bows to no one. The crowd erupted outside the palace gates, a roar of approval that echoed across the continent. From Nairobi to Brasilia, from Istanbul to Jakarta, the message spread like wildfire. In the shadows of the embassy, Bessent turned to his attaché. He's declared financial war. By noon that same day, the retaliation began. Washington moved fast. Within hours of Traoré's speech, the U.S. Treasury issued an official statement. Due to destabilizing actions taken by the government of Burkina Faso, all transactions involving its national gold reserves are suspended under Executive Order 13959. U.S.-based entities are prohibited from engaging in trade with Burkina Faso's central financial institutions. That same hour, Paris followed suit. So did London. International banks froze Burkina Faso's dollar-denominated accounts. Freight companies canceled scheduled gold shipments. Insurance providers withdrew coverage. The country's financial arteries were being cut one by one. In Ouagadougou's bustling central market, merchants were the first to feel it. Prices are rising, one woman muttered, inspecting a sack of imported rice. The traders say the ports are holding back goods. At the presidential palace, Traoré's senior staff gathered again, grim-faced, exhausted. The sanctions are biting, Minister Sawato admitted, but the people must not see us blink. If we hesitate, we lose credibility. Traoré nodded. Let them freeze us. It will show our people that what they call international community is just a club for empire. Then what's our next move? Someone asked, desperation creeping into their voice. Traoré stood, his presence filling the room. We break the illusion. Tomorrow I'll address the nation and the world, not as a beggar, as a man who owns what's under his feet. The next morning, cameras were set, flags unfurled. The speech was already being broadcast before Traoré even reached the podium. Bessent watched from the U.S. Embassy, his phone buzzing with calls from D.C. And then Traoré appeared on the screen, calm, firm, unapologetic. We have been told our gold belongs to others, that freedom is a product with a price tag. Today, we say no more. Our land, our wealth, our rules. Burkina Faso bows to no one. The crowd erupted outside the palace gates, a roar of approval that echoed across the continent. From Nairobi to Brasilia, from Istanbul to Jakarta, the message spread like wildfire. In the shadows of the embassy, Bessent turned to his attaché. He's declared financial war. By noon that same day, the retaliation began. Washington moved fast. Within hours of Traoré's speech, the U.S. Treasury issued an official statement. Due to destabilizing actions taken by the government of Burkina Faso, all transactions involving its national gold reserves are suspended under Executive Order 13959. U.S.-based entities are prohibited from engaging in trade with Burkina Faso's central financial institutions. That same hour, Paris followed suit. So did London. International banks froze Burkina Faso's dollar-denominated accounts. Freight companies canceled scheduled gold shipments. Insurance providers withdrew coverage. The country's financial arteries were being cut, one by one. In Ouagadougou's bustling central market, merchants were the first to feel it. "Prices are rising," one woman muttered, inspecting a sack of imported rice. "The traders say the ports are holding back goods." At the presidential palace, Traoré's senior staff gathered again, grim-faced, exhausted. "The sanctions are biting," Minister Sawato admitted, "but the people must not see us blink. If we hesitate, we lose credibility." Traoré nodded. "Let them freeze us. It will show our people that what they call international community is just a club for empire." "Then what's our next move?" someone asked, desperation creeping into their voice. Traoré stood, his presence filling the room. "We break the illusion. Tomorrow I'll address the nation and the world, not as a beggar, as a man who owns what's under his feet." The next morning, cameras were set, flags unfurled. The speech was already being broadcast before Traoré even reached the podium. Bessent watched from the U.S. Embassy, his phone buzzing with calls from D.C. And then Traoré appeared on the screen. Calm, firm, unapologetic. "We have been told our gold belongs to others, that freedom is a product with a price tag. Today, we say no more. Our land, our wealth, our rules. Burkina Faso bows to no one." The crowd erupted outside the palace gates, a roar of approval that echoed across the continent. From Nairobi to Brasilia, from Istanbul to Jakarta.
Later that evening, Traoré stood alone on the roof of the palace. The skyline of Ouagadougou flickered below, a resilient constellation against the encroaching night. The stars above burned like scattered embers, indifferent to the geopolitical tremors below. His aide approached, his face a canvas of concern. "Sir, are you sure about this path? The world is turning against us." Traoré turned slowly, his silhouette framed against the vast African sky. "Then let it turn," he said, his voice a quiet, unshakable conviction. "We're not here to follow the world. We're here to rebuild it." And far away, in Wall Street boardrooms, a new, unsettling phrase began circulating. The Traoré effect. Unpredictable, uncontrolled, unapologetic. A week passed. Burkina Faso was still standing, but barely. Fuel reserves plummeted. Imported medicine shipments stalled at the borders, creating a silent, creeping crisis. The black market, ever opportunistic, boomed, a testament to the choked official channels. Yet, through it all, President Ibrahim Traoré stood unshaken, publicly at least. But in the palace war room, the calm facade gave way to the grim realities of a shadow war. Maps were spread out across the polished table, satellite images dotted with suspicious routes, patterns of movement meticulously traced. Defense Minister Ouattara pointed to the northern border. "American drones have been flying lower, longer. That's not surveillance, that's pressure." Traoré's eyes narrowed. "And this?" he asked, gesturing to a cluster of circles near a mine in Seniga. "Private security, Wagner maybe, but some chatter says former Blackwater operatives, now under another name." "Mercenaries," Traoré said flatly, the word a bitter taste. "Yes," Ouattara confirmed. "And they're not here to watch, they're here to move something, or stop something from moving." Traoré leaned forward, his gaze piercing the map. "Weapons or gold?" "Could be both." Ouattara paused, then added,
We need to move before they do. That same night, under the thick blanket of darkness, a convoy of 15 trucks left a secure gold facility. They moved like ghosts, escorted by elite units loyal only to Traoré. Their destination, a newly built underground vault in the Bobo Dioulasso region. No coordinates were shared digitally. Only 3 men in the country knew the full, winding route. 2 hours into the drive, near Baromo, the lead truck lurched to a halt. A tire had been punctured, not by accident, but by a spike strip. Ambush. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night. Contact front. Burkina Faso's elite responded swiftly, a trained, disciplined force. They pushed through, returning fire, flanking from both sides. When the dust settled, 3 attackers lay dead. One was unmasked, his face stark in the moonlight. An American. Back in Washington, the White House press secretary dodged questions, a practiced dance of denial. We have no knowledge of any direct military involvement in West Africa. But in a Senate Intelligence Subcommittee meeting, behind closed doors, the tone was starkly different. We underestimated him, Bessent said via secure video link, his face grim. Senator Graham leaned forward, his voice tight. What does that mean exactly? It means he's weaponized economic independence, Bessent replied, the gravity of his words hanging heavy in the air. If others follow, Mali, Niger, Chad, we lose our grip on an entire region. And the response? Bessent's face was grim. We need a narrative shift. Paint him as a threat, a dictator, a destabilizer. And if that doesn't work, we might need someone inside to do what bullets couldn't. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, the national gold vaults were full for the first time in decades. Traoré stood before them, surrounded by engineers, miners, and guards. This is not just metal. This is memory, resistance, a message to every child born here. You were not born poor. You were robbed. The room fell quiet, the weight of his words palpable. We take back what is ours, and if they come for it again, he placed his hand on a gleaming gold bar, they'll find we've learned to fight with more than weapons. 3 weeks into the sanctions, the world expected Traoré to fold. But something unexpected was happening. Rather than collapse, Burkina Faso was adapting. Across the Sahel, regional partners like Mali and Niger began quietly rerouting trade channels to Ouagadougou. Russian advisors offered technical assistance. Even Turkey sent a discreet delegation. And then came the offer that made everyone in the palace freeze. A private jet from Qatar landed under diplomatic secrecy. Aboard, 3 men. 2 were economic envoys. The third, David Marcus, a former J.P. Morgan executive turned global consultant with links to multiple intelligence services. In the palace conference room, Traoré sat across from them, hands folded, his eyes unblinking, as Marcus leaned forward. Mr. President, no one wants this to escalate further. My clients are ready to negotiate full restoration of access to global systems. In exchange, you agree to a structured gold partnership, shared oversight, gradual reintegration. Traoré said nothing. Marcus smiled, opening a tablet, charts, projections, smiling Western diplomats. We're not asking you to give up your gold, Mr. President, just to share it responsibly. The world runs on trust. Traoré finally spoke, his voice quiet but piercing. Whose world? Marcus blinked, momentarily thrown. The global. You mean your world? Traoré cut him off, his voice rising with a controlled intensity. I'm not asking to sit at your table. I'm flipping the table over. You'll be isolated, Marcus warned, his smooth demeanor cracking. No, Traoré said quietly, his gaze unwavering. I'll be sovereign. After the meeting, Marcus was escorted back to his jet, but his departure was without consequence. That evening, Traoré convened his inner circle. That wasn't a negotiation. It was a warning in a suit. What's our move? Asked Defense Minister Ouattara. We expose the deal publicly. Let the people see what their offers look like. No more back rooms. From now on, we fight with light. Across Burkina Faso, social media lit up as Traoré released footage of the meeting.
Clips of Marcus saying, "Just share it responsibly," were spliced next to images of colonial exploitation. Hashtag Our Gold Not Yours began trending across West Africa, then across African diaspora communities in the US, France, and Brazil. Suddenly, what was a national crisis became a global story of resistance. In a Manhattan boardroom, Scott Bessent watched it all unfold on a tablet. "Damn it," he muttered. His advisor looked up. "It's not just about gold anymore." "No," Bessent whispered, a chilling realization dawning on his face. "Now it's about who controls the story." Traoré had changed the terrain of battle, not with tanks, not with treaties, but with truth and just enough fire to make the world sweat.
But in Washington, it was anything but celebration. Scott Bessent slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing in the sterile silence of the Situation Room. "He's legitimizing himself internationally," he seethed, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "If we don't act now, the next generation will grow up seeing him as a freedom fighter." "But what do we do?" one advisor asked, his voice laced with desperation. Bessent's eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed. Crash the summit, discredit him, or better, trap him in front of the world. Back in Burkina Faso, preparations for the Gold Sovereignty Summit were in full swing. Heads of state from several non-aligned nations confirmed attendance, their presence a quiet endorsement of Traoré's audacious vision. Media crews from Al Jazeera, TRT, and even CNN, drawn by the scent of a geopolitical earthquake, requested accreditation. Inside the palace, Traoré reviewed the guest list, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Bessent's name isn't on it," his security chief observed, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "He'll come," Traoré replied, his gaze distant, knowing, just not with their own name. Sure enough, 3 days before the summit, a formal RSVP arrived from the U.S. Treasury Department, a junior assistant secretary. But Traoré knew better. It was a mask, and Bessent, the architect of the old order, was surely behind it. The Gold Sovereignty Summit opened in a refurbished colonial-era building in central Ouagadougou, a deliberate and potent symbol. In the front row sat African leaders, economists, and independent journalists, their faces alight with anticipation. The U.S. delegation entered last, a phalanx of crisp suits and colder stares. Scott Bessent wore no name tag, a ghost in the machine, but Traoré saw him, a faint smirk touching his lips. Then as the cameras rolled, Traoré stepped to the podium. "For decades," he began, his voice resonating through the grand hall, "gold has flowed out of this continent, shipped in silence, processed in foreign capitals, sold on foreign exchanges, and we, its owners, were left with empty vaults and broken promises." He paused, letting the words hang in the charged air, then turned, his gaze sweeping directly toward Bessent's row. "That era is over. Today, we reclaim what's ours, not just the resource, but the right to define its value." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. "And if anyone believes we can't manage our own wealth," he looked directly at Bessent, his eyes unwavering, "you're free to try and take it again." The next speaker approached the stage, but Bessent didn't move. He sat frozen, the defiant words echoing in his mind. Traoré had just declared gold sovereignty on live global television with him in the room, and the world was watching. While the summit continued in the spotlight, the real battle moved to the shadows. That night, in a heavily guarded section of the presidential residence, Traoré met with his closest advisors and a newly arrived ally, Seliko Kababa, a forensic economist from Guinea who had exposed French-backed laundering operations 2 years earlier. Kababa placed a folder on the desk, its contents a damning indictment. "This," he said, his voice grim, "is how they moved Burkina Faso's gold out for decades, on paper." Inside were satellite-tracked shipment records, forged customs clearances, and payment trails linked to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, all dating back to before Traoré's presidency. Most of it was laundered through shell firms tied to Bessent's old hedge fund network, Kababa added, his gaze meeting Traoré's. "They didn't just take the gold, they bet against your economy while doing it." Traoré leaned back in his chair, a cold fire in his eyes. "And now they're back, offering to help. "It's not help," Kababa replied. "It's leverage." The next morning, a secret meeting was scheduled. Traoré, Kababa, the national prosecutor, and a team of cybercrime experts. Their plan? To issue international warrants for 5 executives currently attending the summit, individuals directly tied to the laundering web. "If we arrest them now, it will be war," Ouattara said. "No, it will be justice and a warning. Then we'll need proof strong enough to withstand international court," Kababa replied, his brow furrowed. "We already have it," Traoré said calmly, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. At 2 p.m. the following day, mid-summit, the national prosecutor held an emergency press conference before cameras from around the world. She declared, her voice firm and clear, Burkina Faso is issuing arrest warrants for financial crimes and unlawful enrichment involving foreign nationals and corporations. She read out the names: 2 Americans, 1 Brit, 1 Swiss, and 1 Canadian. Inside the summit hall, chaos erupted. Bessent's allies scrambled, their faces a mixture of shock and panic. He remained seated, jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the screen. Traoré entered the room slowly, confidently. "You thought this was about speeches," he said quietly as he passed by Bessent. "It was about exposure." Within hours, Interpol requests were submitted. Global banks began to scramble to respond. International media declared it a historic pivot in post-colonial justice. But for Bessent, it was something else entirely. Checkmate. Washington was furious. Within 12 hours of the press conference, the U.S. Treasury issued a strongly worded statement accusing Burkina Faso of targeted, politically motivated legal aggression against American citizens. A veiled threat followed. If these arrests proceed, the United States will reassess all economic cooperation, including aid and trade relations. Scott Bessent, although cornered, wasn't done fighting. He convened a crisis meeting with European and American delegates at a luxury compound on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. "We've got one play left," he said, his voice hoarse. "Cut them off financially." He laid out a plan, freezing Burkina Faso's access to international markets, lobbying the IMF to delay debt negotiations, and warning global investors to pull out of West Africa's unstable zone. "We'll make Traoré regret this stunt," he vowed. But back in the presidential palace, Traoré was already anticipating the backlash. In the war room, maps and financial charts covered the walls. His team was already coordinating with Russian, Chinese, and BRICS-aligned institutions for emergency support and gold-backed bilateral trade agreements. "Let them shut the door," Traoré said, his eyes gleaming with resolve. "We're building a new one." His finance minister entered with a report. "Mali and Niger just pledged to route their gold reserves through our central bank in solidarity. We've become the nerve center." "Then we hold the line," Traoré said, "and if Bessent tries to collapse our system, let's give him something to fear." The next day, Burkina Faso's national gold reserve was officially tokenized on a blockchain-based system developed with engineers from India and Brazil. It was open source, transparent, immune to foreign seizure. The international press called it the most radical act of monetary independence since Libya under Gaddafi. Scott Bessent saw the headline on his phone. He knew what it meant. He hadn't just failed to stop Traoré, he'd accelerated his rise.
By the 3rd day of the summit, the tide had turned completely. The initial shockwaves from the arrest warrants and the bold blockchain move had settled, replaced by a grudging admiration and then a strategic reevaluation. European delegates who had initially supported Bessent's hardline stance were now conspicuously silent, their faces betraying a growing unease. More significantly, Asian and South American envoys, sensing the shifting winds of power, were approaching Traoré with discreet proposals: joint ventures, gold swaps, and development funds that bypassed the traditional Western gatekeepers. The old order was fracturing, and new alliances were being forged in the very hall where its supremacy was meant to be reaffirmed. But Scott Bessent wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. In a desperate final bid to salvage influence, he arranged a private meeting with Traoré. Off the record, no cameras, no staff. Just the 2 men, the architect of the old world and the builder of the new, in a final, raw confrontation. The meeting took place in a stone-walled security room deep under the presidential complex, a space designed for secrets, not public declarations. Bessent walked in, his signature composure still intact, but there was a fire behind his eyes, a flicker of desperation he could no longer fully conceal. "You've humiliated the people I represent," he began, his voice tight, strained. "And you've cornered yourself in the process." Traoré didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, unyielding. "No, I've just made it impossible for anyone to exploit us without consequence." "You're triggering instability," Bessent retorted, his voice rising. "Foreign investors are scared. Your allies are shaky. You think you've won?" Traoré slowly stood up, stepping closer, his presence commanding the small room. "You think the only way a country wins is when Wall Street applauds?" He leaned in, his voice a low, powerful rumble. "But what you call instability, I call birth pains. A new order doesn't arrive quietly." Bessent's jaw clenched. "There are limits, President Traoré. The U.S. Treasury, IMF, World Bank, these aren't enemies you want." "They were never friends," Traoré answered, his words cutting like a blade. Outside, as if on cue, news broke that South Africa had proposed a Pan-African sovereign wealth alliance with Burkina Faso as one of the core gold-holding members. The alliance, audacious in its scope, would bypass the U.S. dollar entirely. It was the geopolitical equivalent of a gunshot, echoing across financial capitals. Bessent's phone buzzed, a call from a senior State Department official. "Get on a plane, Scott. It's over." As Bessent was escorted out of the country under diplomatic pressure, international headlines exploded. Burkina Faso defies the West. Gold diplomacy. Traoré rewrites the rules. From target to torchbearer, the narrative had irrevocably shifted. But inside the palace, Traoré simply reviewed reports, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He nodded once. "The chains are breaking," he murmured. 1 week after Bessent's departure, Traoré stood before the National Assembly in Ouagadougou. The chamber was full. Ministers, military leaders, village chiefs, students, and international media. He was not reading from notes. He stood, his voice clear and resonant. "They told us that our gold was only valuable if they said so. They told us we were too unstable, too poor, too unprepared to decide our own destiny." He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze encompassing every struggle, every sacrifice. "And when we didn't kneel, they sent bankers instead of bombs." There was silence, charged, heavy with the weight of history. "But this time, we didn't sign. We stood." Applause, thunderous and long, erupted, shaking the very foundations of the building. Across the Sahel, across West Africa, his speech was broadcast in real time. In Bamako, Niamey, Conakry, and Khartoum, young leaders replayed his words on phones, projectors, radios. The message wasn't just about gold or power, it was about sovereignty, the kind that can't be bought, bullied, or borrowed. Traoré didn't just resist an empire, he rewrote the terms of engagement. And in doing so, he reminded the world that independence isn't given, it's claimed, one decision at a time. If this epic tale of defiance and liberation resonated with you, if it stirred something deep within, then don't let the story end here. Like this chapter, share it with those who need to hear it. Comment with your thoughts on this powerful narrative, and, most importantly, subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that challenge the status quo and celebrate the indomitable human spirit.